Welcome back, everyone. Today's episode is pretty exciting. We're sitting down with Danielle Ryan, owner of Lifestyle by Design Studio. I have been looking forward to this for so long. We're sitting down chatting with her about just the way we look at opportunities, and especially with the crazy 2020 year we had and 2021, we're kind of recapping on honing in on our goals, but looking at goals in a different way. This episode is going to be very, very moving on a lot of different levels. We talk about her coaching business as well as her yoga studio and how pivoting and changing her business has really been an eye-opener. So let's get into this podcast. Like I always say, I don't want to give too much away. So let's jump in and see what Danielle has to say about pivoting her business and the opportunities. So where did you first get into the industry you're in? Or was it, I know you kind of were starting I was listening to a few of your podcasts in the sense of getting a gauge on you thought you were going to be in the corporate world using that power suit like you described in your podcast. And where did that kind of change? Where did you start to really realize what you were passionate about and wanted to bring to the table that way?
Yeah, so I was working in corporate. I was actually working for a municipality, and my background is actually in environmental studies. So my long-term goal was to work in a field job where I could be outside all day in a canoe, collecting water samples, living the outdoor dream. And I got hired in administration in the environmental department, thinking that I would be able to sort of move my way over. And just the way that the unions work in a municipal setting, there's a lot of barriers for you jumping from an admin union to an outdoor workers union. So basically job opportunities kept coming up, and I kept getting passed up for other people that were either in the union or had worked that job before. And it was very, very discouraging to constantly get my hopes up thinking okay, this is going to be my golden ticket. And then I'm still sitting here answering people's complaints about how their garbage didn't get picked up yesterday. And so I'm sitting there thinking my entire life, I've always been very ambitious, always have a million things on the go, wanting to be everything, do everything. And so when I was in that job, I really felt like my skills were being underutilized. So I decided to start my podcast in that time, just as a means of using my creative energy into a productive outlet that could help other people. And so through learning how to run a podcast, promote a podcast, all of that, I got into the world of blogging and learned that there were people that had full-time businesses that were run on the internet. And so that kind of opened my eyes to the whole world of entrepreneurship. And while all of this was happening, I was sort of going on my own journey of self-discovery, thinking do I really want to work at this desk for the next 35 years to retire and then maybe enjoy my life one day? Or is there something I could do right now that would get me a little bit closer to actually enjoying my life now while I'm living it? So essentially, I sort of on a whim one day, it was my 26th birthday. My partner and I were on a bus going on a brewery tour from brewery to brewery. So I'd had a few drinks, but I was you know what? There's no better time than right now to do this. So I literally on a whim hopped on my phone, booked my yoga teacher training in Portugal, booked my round trip flights. And it was a month from that day. So I was okay, Monday I have to go in and put my notice in. And essentially that's what happened. So, cause I had forked out thousands of dollars for all of these trainings and whatever, it was a huge commitment, right? So it's no going back now. Showed up to work on Monday, told my boss I was leaving in 30 days, and the rest is kind of history from there.
So it just took a little liquid courage, that's all.
Exactly. It was one of those things where I'd been thinking about it for so long, and I just needed to commit and be you know what, the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to go and become a yoga teacher, try and start a business, and it's going to fail. And then I'll just end up back at another admin job. I have the experience in the industry. So if I needed another 9-to-5 job, I was confident that I could make it happen again.
And you started your podcast 2017, right?
Yeah. So that's almost 4 years ago. Yeah. So, and even still, it's more of just a side project, a passion project, I guess you could say. I love connecting with other people, having them share their story on that platform, and really just being an outlet for people. A lot of the people who listen to the podcast are the same age as me or around my age, and sort of just trying to navigate what am I doing with my life? What is the greater purpose of why I'm here? And so I like to offer advice and insight into helping people sort of discover that, because I know for me, that was something that stood in my way for so long, was feeling like I was meant for something so much more, but not really knowing what it was or how I was going to do that.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast with Lauren Smith, so she's going to be a guest on as well. And it just how like I met her in Toronto. I've gone to a Boss Babe event, and
Okay, cool.
She's just like, her energy and everything is amazing too. And when I was listening to your podcast with her, like just the realness of it, and just like realizing, like I felt like the whole age thing, because we're in the same boat. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is all hitting home. And even your New Year's resolution outlook, like having a word of the year and really realizing, like, let's like sit back with the whole goal thing, because I mean, looking back at 2020, and we can really take it hard on us, like, oh, we didn't meet those financial goals, or we didn't meet that fitness goal, or this didn't happen. And instead of being like kind of sitting back and being like, wow, look at what I did do, like we really had to pivot in all type of businesses, no matter if you're even a parent or a school teacher or an entrepreneur or anything. We all had to pivot one way or another.
100%. And like, I know, you know, that running your business, obviously, like you and I both run very like hands-on, in person. We do things with people. And so with COVID and everything, that was like a whole thing that none of us expected. Like you said, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you worked a desk job, and then all of a sudden you're having to bring your whole office to your house and figure out how that works, like learning to understand that, like, I think it's great to have goals and ambitions that we want to reach eventually, but at the same time, we need to be gentle and understanding with ourselves that there is so many things in life, regardless of whether it's a global pandemic or just like regular life, that are going to happen that we can't predict. So we can't plan for the fact that we're going to go through a pandemic, or that maybe we're going to get sick by other means and we have to like take time off work, or maybe our spouse is going to get sick, or so many things happen in life that we can't plan for. So in that episode, I was really trying to stress the importance of just understanding that, okay, you can have this sort of theme that you're going after, but it's better to look at things on a micro scale. And I was going over this with the girls in my membership this week, was this idea of setting smaller goals that are attainable in a very short period of time. So we're looking at like, okay, what is one thing I want to accomplish by next Friday? And what are the steps that I can take to get that one thing done? Because if I can focus on this one single small goal, rather than I want to host a retreat and have 800 people show up, if I can just say like, okay, I'm going to create a website for my new business that I'm starting, and I'm going to have that done by next Friday, then that sort of makes the building blocks for you to start to go after those bigger things. So it's not about just like jumping after the grand prize at the end of the road. It's about picking one small thing, achieving that, so that you can move on to the next, the next, the next. Does that make sense?
You can use that with anything when it comes to fitness or education, or even like, I loved your point where you're keeping all your admin stuff to the Friday. And that's what I've done for years, actually. So it's so like ironic in a way that your train of thought was the exact same, because I've been taking Fridays off, air quotes, actually working on my business instead of in my business. So I would be at the spa still 4 days a week, but my Friday was all my admin, but really the stuff I hate doing
exactly
on my Friday. But it was great because it made me accountable on that Friday, was all the stuff and all the emails and everything coming through that week. I knew I had that Friday to go through and do all the stuff for payrolls and all that entrepreneur stuff that we really don't want to be doing. But it was, I think too, when you said, like, when you realize breaking things down, like even with my team, we'll do like a month worth of content. But then I realized like halfway through, we're 2 weeks in, I'm like, our entire forecast has changed, what our plan is at the end of that month. And I'm like, okay, but this content's still good. We can still use it, but let's push it to another time. It's just not the right time right now. So I totally agree with you. That long-term goal sometimes is good and ideal, but like breaking it down, because even if you want to reach a certain amount of followers on social media, or you want to have X amount of money in your bank account, or you want to be able to do a triathlon or something, like breaking it down and making it realistic. And I think figuring out what your why is, why you're doing it, because it takes some grind depending what you're working on too, right?
100%. And just this idea that oftentimes I find, especially I see this working with clients, is if we set goals that are too lofty, it almost works like in the opposite that we want it to. And instead of us like getting super motivated, being like, yeah, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to start this program and I'm going to get 50 people to join me, it's like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. I don't even want to do step one because there's so many things that I need to do that like, it's not going to happen for me. So if we can just think like, okay, again, coming back to step one, what's the first thing I can do to prove to myself that like, okay, I did that small thing. So maybe I can do this like slightly bigger thing, and then building it from there so that we're not sort of like demotivating ourselves by the overwhelm of like this massive idea.
I find too, I'm like very jumbly in my head. And for me, sometimes to have team meetings with my girls, I'm like, okay, I'm just rambling. Like, I'm just like, here, try this, or this would be a cool idea. And then I'm like, okay, let's touch on, usually I'm like, okay, let's touch on 3 points we need to cover this week. And let's all just grind and get that done. Because I feel like as entrepreneurs too, we're kind of in business because we like to be in control of our settings, what our day-to-days are. And sometimes that can get us in trouble at the same time, right? Of prioritizing what we really want to get done.
100%. So I've always advocated that like the reason I didn't do well in the 9 to 5 that I was in was because I value autonomy over everything. I want to be in control of what I'm doing and where I'm doing it and when I'm doing it. And so sometimes the reality of that is that I'm like playing around on my website on a Saturday night at 7 p.m., which people are like, oh my God, I would never work on a weekend. But it's like, I want to work when I feel like working. And if on Monday at 10 in the morning, I don't feel like working, then I'm not going to. I'm going to sit and watch YouTube for 3 hours. Like,
Yeah.
not to say I do that all the time, but just having that flexibility is something that's so huge for me. But coming back to this idea of like also having to have sort of structure for yourself, because I am very much like very multi-passionate. I want to do everything all the time. And I have so many ideas that it can be really hard to jump from like task to task to task. And so I had this really great conversation with a friend of mine who works in like the tech startup community in Vancouver. And he was saying like, Danielle, you're wasting so much time when you're switching from one like podcasting to content creation to merchandising to like doing all these things. Like, you need to set a structure for yourself, because the amount of time you're wasting, just like it's like scientifically proven in your brain that when you switch from task to task, it like burns energy. So you're wasting time trying to like reconfigure to like, okay, now my focus is on this thing, but I was just doing this thing. And so, like you said before, I've moved all my admin work to Friday so that every day, if something pops into my inbox that I don't have time to deal with, I just slide it into the folder on my desktop that says Friday. So on Friday, I can open all the fun surprises that I didn't want to deal with for the rest of the week. But at least my attention is focused on like, okay, it's Friday. I'm mentally in the headspace to be doing that. So I find that that's really, really helpful. But it also still allows me that flexibility to do what I want when I want to do it.
Yeah. And I find with myself, I totally get what you mean. Like when you're in like that creative space or something and you're like, oh, I'm going to work on this, it's Saturday night or something, right? Like I find when you're an entrepreneur, things just like you'll wake up in the morning and be like, oh, all of a sudden it's like this spurt of energy. Like sometimes I haven't even had my coffee yet and that happens. And I'm just in that mind frame to shoot some product photos, or I need to jump on a call with somebody or whatever. It just happens. Even the way this whole podcast idea came about, to be honest, it was just, I missed people. And with the lockdown and everything, which I'm sure you can totally relate to this, having that personal connection with people was something I missed. And just even jumping on calls with people and reconnecting has been incredible. If people I haven't talked to since like 5 years ago and we pick up right where we left off, it's just so amazing at so many different levels.
Yeah, COVID has definitely showed us like the power in adapting. And I've definitely enjoyed reconnecting as well. Like tons of people from like university who I haven't literally seen since like 2014 were like, yeah, let's have game night. Like what's going on? But I think it's so great that everyone is sort of in this headspace where we're all faced with the same struggle, in that it's not like I get to go hang out with my family and you don't. None of us do. We're all stuck inside craving that human connection. And so having outlets, whether it's like this, like a podcast, or we're connecting through like Instagram DMs or whatever that is. I always joke with my audience that I make all my friends on the internet, but it's just the reality of the world that we're living in right now. Like I can't just go to the local bar and hang out with new people and have like we used to host networking events and stuff locally, and we're not able to do any of that anymore.
Even I noticed too, of being remote, even with my team, it's really hard to get like the communication behind it, but also like the time management and trying, like I'm like we were saying, as an entrepreneur, I love working just kind of when I'm creative and when it comes, and and to get outside. That's what I've noticed has been the struggle, is like, you're working at home, you live and breathe work right now too. So it's been hard to like really structure your day and take that time to get outside or do yoga or get active.
Yeah. I just shared this TikTok the other day that's like, my work is my home is my work. When I leave work, I'm at home. And when I leave home, I'm at work. And it's just like, it's so true though. If you don't create that boundary for yourself, then you're going to find yourself in this constant cycle where you're like always working. So, sort of like you were alluding to, like if I have a spark of inspiration, I'm going to follow that regardless of whether it's within like my work day or if it's in the middle of the evening. But for the most part, I do try to structure my day so that I don't work past 4 p.m. My partner has a job where he's home from work at 4. So I always try and end my day at that same time as well, so that the two of us can spend time together and it doesn't really impact our relationship in the sense that like I'm always working every day till 9 p.m. or something. And that's not to say like with yoga, obviously a lot of my clients work regular jobs as well. So I'll have to teach the odd class here and there. But when it comes to me, like sitting in my office at my computer, I try to create that boundary for myself just so that I can still have that work-life balance when everything is so closely intertwined. Now, I guess for me, the thing that I've always had working in my favor is that the yoga studio I work out of is my office, regardless of whether there's coronavirus or not. So those boundaries were long since established. But prior to that, like we only have had our house for about a year now. And before that, I was a fully mobile service. So I was driving all over. And that was something I definitely struggled with, was being like, okay, when do I work? And what do I do when I'm working? Like when I sit down at my desk, like what am I even supposed to be doing to feel productive? And something I was talking with one of my clients recently was this idea that I think is ingrained in our culture really, of always needing to feel busy. So like, oh, people will say like, how was your day? Oh, it was great, but I was so busy. And then you think about it, okay, like what did you actually do all day? And you're like, well, I really didn't do that much. And so coming back to what we were talking about initially is this idea of simplicity, the word for the year. And so mine is simplicity, simple, making things more simple in my life, in my business, in all of it. And so for me, that looks a lot like understanding the fact that just because I have my work hours set from 8 until 4 doesn't mean I have to be working for that full 8-hour day. If I did all the work that I need to get done that day by noon, then I can call it quits and leave. I don't have to just sit at my desk and pretend to be busy just so I can tell myself and have that satisfaction of like, oh, I was so busy, I put in 8 hours. Because the reality of the situation, and I think a lot of corporations are even learning this, having their employees work from home now, is that if you're a productive person and you're really focused and your whole heart is in on whatever task you're focused on, you can often get it done a lot faster than it would take you sitting in like a cubicle in an office setting. So I think having that sort of leeway with yourself to understand that like you don't have to have this pressure to feel like you have to put in 40 hours because that's what a work week should look like. As long as you're being productive and you're seeing those results financially in your business, or your business is growing the way you want it to, then it really doesn't matter what your work week looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense, because like even I've noticed now, like I'm not a huge morning person. Like I'm not, and I don't think I ever will be at this point in my life. It's just not me. But I know like I have a good like 5 hours in me to be like super productive, like top notch. Like sometimes I forget to even like eat or whatever. You just get in that role, right? So I'm like a to-do list person. I literally have a paper and pen right beside me. And those are like, I cross it off. And then as soon as that list is done for the day, I'm done. Unless like obviously little things come up that need to be done right away. But it's something where I'm starting not to stress about that 9 to 5, like that traditional work day. And I think now people working from home, or I see people out walking now so much earlier, or they're taking an hour away for lunch to go and move their body or to have a lunch. And I'm like, it's so funny. I was saying to my boyfriend, I was like, I don't know how we lived so busy. I was looking back at my calendar last year, like before the pandemic, and I was like, we were driving back and forth from Toronto like twice a week. I think of all the receipts I went through for eating out and being unhealthy, and I'm not moving my body, sitting in a car, sitting at my desk. Like, so I think people are really taking this time working from home and strategizing like what they actually want, what their real dream job is going to be. And I feel like so many entrepreneurs are coming out of this as well. People turning their hobbies into real life careers and like really becoming an entrepreneur because they're realizing it's possible and they're in a little bit more control that way as well. Have you noticed that too?
Yeah, 100%. So I recently, and by recently, I mean like October, maybe, I started making TikToks every single day. And I essentially focus on like small businesses, helping people start their small businesses and advice for other business owners. And within that community, I've seen a lot of people, particularly those who were maybe laid off as a result of the pandemic, really come out like incredibly strong through this, building like massive businesses in what really is a pretty short period of time. Like it's not even been 12 months really. And we have people replacing like their full-time incomes, becoming entrepreneurs, which I think is a huge thing to be said, given the circumstances. And again, it comes back to this idea of like adaptability and just like you said, having the time to actually really sit back and reevaluate, like, what is it that I want for my life? Is the job that I'm in really making me happy? Or are there changes that I could make? Or maybe it just simply came out of boredom. Like I got laid off and now I have all this free time. What do I like to do? And how can I make money out of it?
When you were younger, did you always think you were going to be an entrepreneur, or what did you always think you were going to be in some type of like full government job or like some type of business that way?
Yeah, so I have no one in my family is an entrepreneur. I have never been exposed to entrepreneurship. One of my friends, again, the one who works in tech startup, was like, when we were in university, he was like, you know what, Danielle, like you really need to become an entrepreneur. Like that's where it's at. And I looked at him and I was like, you are on another planet. That is never going to happen. That's stupid. I am not the entrepreneur type. I'm going to be working in my office job, you know, climbing the corporate ladder, doing that. And then once I sort of got into that, I was like, okay, this isn't for me. And that's not to say that like any 9 to 5 ever is not for me. I always try to make it clear that like, I don't know what it would be, but if some corporate opportunity came my way that seemed interesting and gave me the flexibility that I want, I would potentially take it. Not that I'm actively seeking a 9 to 5 job, but just for now, entrepreneurship works for me. It works for my lifestyle. It works for what I want right now, but 10 years from now, that could change. So I always just like to kind of treat my life like an experiment and take whatever comes, whatever seems interesting at the time is going to satisfy me. I'll go for it for as long as I could ride it out. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, I love that. I love that on so many different levels because I feel like I always say I was kind of like an entrepreneur before it was cool.
yeah.
Now it's like this whole big like
Everyone's an entrepreneur, wants to be an entrepreneur.
Right. So I remember like I was 20 when I started. Well, I was younger than that when I started my first businesses, but like I was like, all my friends thought I was crazy. Like I just think, and even I look back, this is kind of off topic, but kind of the same. I remember listening to country music when I was in like public school. And everyone made fun of me that I listened to country music.
Me too.
Like that. And then I remember high school, everyone's like, oh, have you heard of this song? I'm like, guys, that song's been around for years. Like, come on, that is not new. And then that is like something I always want to tell like younger clients or anyone that's younger listening to this podcast right now is that stay true to what you think. Like people are going to try to mold you to what they believe and what they think is true. But like, I think of the examples of like country music. I loved country music and I always listened to it. I wasn't going to change because that's what someone said. And even entrepreneurship. I was 20 when I started my legit first business. And I was like, so many people thought I was crazy. I was like wired differently, which we kind of are as entrepreneurs, but that it's just,
that's a story for another day.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. But I think people just need to realize that I love your idea of it being an experiment of life, right? We only have one to live. I don't want to be an old lady in my rocking chair being like, oh, I wish I did that.
And like Lauren and I were talking about this in our discussion, was this idea of normalizing that it's okay to change our minds. Because I think what we see all too often is you go to school for a particular thing, you get a job in that career, and it's so scary to all of a sudden be like, well, I don't want to do this thing anymore, or this thing isn't interesting to me anymore. And so for me, with this idea of like treating my life like an experiment, it's like, okay, I went to school and I got this degree and that's what was interesting to me at the time and what I thought I wanted to do. And then 5 years went by and I didn't want to do that anymore. So now I'm doing this, I'm teaching yoga, I'm studying mental health, I'm doing that. But who's to say that 5 or 10 years from now, something else isn't going to draw my attention and make me want to go that way. So I think it's just being open to the idea that people are always going to have something to say about you, whether you are doing the thing or you're not doing the thing. So it's up to you to decide like whose opinions you put weight on and whose you just say like, screw it. Like the number of people who have said things about how stupid my business is and how no one would ever want to buy that service. Yet I paid for this house that I live in and I'm managed to make enough money to pay my bills. Like clearly somebody wants the service I'm offering. So maybe it's not for everyone, but you just have to learn how to sort of weed out those opinions.
Well, I'm sure you can vouch this too, is I always know who to talk business with and who not to. So I have my friends where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm never going to talk like business anything with them. It's all like hobby-based, sports, whatever.
How's business going? Great.
Yeah,
period.
Yeah, 100%. And then I have my friends that like are not even entrepreneurs. They're just interested to know what the heck's like. I can sincerely tell that they're interested and I don't feel judged or anything else about it. And I always try to know the audience before that happens, or even introducing myself to someone. I'm someone more than just an entrepreneur. And I think people need to realize that. And I had a great chat with, I've been interviewing quite a few of my pageant connections from when I used to compete. And it's so funny because it's like this persona. It's like 1 minute you're an entrepreneur, 1 minute you're a mother, 1 minute you're this. Like everyone becomes the own version of them, but there's so many different things that mold you into that. And people realizing like, even though you're an entrepreneur, you don't need to just be surrounded by entrepreneurs, but yet you need to be surrounded by positive people that are going to help bring you and lift you up.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there's value in that, in creating sort of this community of people who do get it, because you can get that like, okay, I'm doing this thing in my business and it's not working. Like what works in your business, and maybe you can learn from that. But then also having people who don't understand the entrepreneur space, because I know for me, even with something as simple as like my email list, I have friends, like good friends of mine who are on my email list, and I'll ask them for feedback. Like, what do you like? Am I sending too many emails? Not enough? Like, because they're kind of like the clients that I would be working with. So to have that direct feedback from someone who's not an entrepreneur and is on the consumer end of things is really helpful in being able to hone your service and offerings to the people you're trying to reach.
And that's great for you as a business owner to ask for that opinion. I feel like a lot of people, I do the same thing with, I try not to get my family too much involved because I feel like that's just like a whole other.
Yeah.
But I ask my employees, my staff, clients, like I'll ask them their opinion. And that's the only way you're going to grow. Right. And even like those books, like I read a lot as well. I'm sure you do, as it's just something that the knowledge that people, even within conversations, like I've noticed from the 2 weeks that we've been batching content and talking to people and trying to listen to more podcasts and learning different strategies, is it's amazing to see the different techniques people are using, but also asking for feedback, because you also want to make sure it's in line with you and your branding, the person you are, your beliefs, and all of that.
And that it's something that those people actually want. Because I think as an entrepreneur, we can often get tunnel vision and we think that every idea we have is a really great idea. And then we put it out as like an offer and then we get crickets and we're like, well, why didn't anyone want this? This is the best idea I've ever had. But it's because we didn't take that time to actually ask the people what it was they wanted. And in business, that can be sometimes a really costly mistake, especially if you're investing a lot in like a product or something, creating this thing, and then nobody wants it. So definitely constantly seeking that feedback, not only so you can create things that people want, but so that you can improve the offerings you already have to better suit the needs of the people that you work with.
That's brilliant. I'm sure you even notice that with your e-commerce now, right? Like I always put a poll out usually before we mass buy or mass produce something. And I always put a poll like this or this, or what product do we need now? Or what do you got? Because I have, oh my gosh, there's been times where I've bought like hundreds to thousands of units of something and then there's no one buying it. When I'm like, this is gonna sell, like you said, right? You have that tunnel vision. You're like, oh, this is gonna be my biggest like project yet. This is gonna do amazing. So has that happened to you?
Yeah, a few of my like first products were definitely like that. I'm actually going through releasing like a bunch of new merch, and essentially it's been like a month-long process of me asking like, okay, do we like this style of font or this style of font? Do we want phrases? Do we want acronyms? Like, what do we like? What do we don't like? And sort of letting people go back and forth. Because the first time I bought merch, I only did like a pilot run and it sold really well. But I'm like, do people want the same logo printed on like 7 different items, or do we just want like this or that? So I'm always asking people for feedback, because at the end of the day, like it, especially me, like I'm a sole prop. So anything that I buy is coming out of my bottom line for me directly. And so if I spend $1,000 on 100 t-shirts and nobody buys any, then I just have 100 t-shirts and I'm out $1,000. So it's like, you have to be really smart and strategic. There is some risk involved in like, there's a few products where I just kind of like bought them and hope for the best. And luckily they worked out. But so there is sort of that like guessing game. But again, it comes down to asking people like, what would you like to see in the shop? And then maybe sourcing products from that feedback. So knowing sort of to find the balance between like what seems like a good idea and what actually is a good idea.
My team laughs at me because I'll be like, okay, we're not going to be launching any new products for 2020. And then like literally over the Christmas break, I'm like, okay, we're launching another one. Like sometimes I just go on these rants with buying product and trying to brand and whatever else. But even speaking of TikTok, some of the ones we filmed, I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. And I'm like, what? We've almost had 200K like views on this thing. Like, how is that possible? So have you noticed that with your
oh my God. Okay. I will put like an hour into curating the perfect lip sync, like, cause I always do like funny ones where people are talking or whatever. And I'll think it's like the greatest TikTok ever. And then it gets like 50 likes or something. And then I do some stupid thing. Like I did one the other day where I was dancing, absolutely terrible dancer. I cannot dance. And all of a sudden it like pops off. I'm like, what do these people in this algorithm want from me? So I don't know. With TikTok, I try not to take it too seriously because I feel like the harder I try, the worse the video does. And people just want like the short, simple, informative stuff that's going to help them. So.
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah. I am not good at the lip singing thing. I have tried and I think we should just do bloopers because of me trying to do it. I feel like that would probably do better.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my God. Yeah. There's no rhyme or reason really to the TikTok algorithm, but I love it. It's a fun, like creative outlet. So if I'm like sitting at my desk and it's the middle of the day and I can't seem to focus, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go film a few TikToks and then we'll come back to it.
And I love with Reels now on Instagram because some people are like anti TikTok, which I totally respect those people. And I find with the Reels now, it's great because you can literally recycle that
exactly
onto there. So people are like, how are you touching all these platforms? And I'm like, even with what we're doing today, like we're touching IGTV, we're touching YouTube and our podcast all in three. We're literally killing, well, not killing. We're touching three, I was going to say killing three birds with one stone, but we're touching 3 points of social media on 3 different platforms in one call. So I think people really need to start strategizing, working smart instead of hard. But my whole thing from COVID, I think, was systems. Like I really dialed in on what systems were working and what systems weren't in my business. And I found like we weren't working as much at the spa since like COVID happened, but our revenue numbers were skyrocketing. And I'm like, how is this working? But we had launched a lot of new projects that I was listening to what people wanted. They wanted skincare consulting online. They wanted e-commerce. They wanted to do all these things. And I was like, okay, I should have been listening earlier. And also taking the time to really dial in on like the better online booking systems, the websites. But that was all something when we were off for those 3.5 months, that was something where I was like, I don't know if this is ever going to happen again in my business where we get 3 months off, air quote, and I'm going to utilize it. So I feel like with being off again and being in another shutdown, people are really like, okay, I'm going to take this serious now and start really dialing in on what needs to happen moving forward.
Exactly. Because we're kind of in this place right now where it's like, we're either going to pivot and come out of this in a better position for whatever the new reality is, or we're just going to sit here and ride the wave and cross our fingers and hope that like we can just keep doing what we were already doing before and that it's still going to work. So, and it's fine. Like if that's going to be your approach, that's okay. But if you're listening to this and you're kind of like thinking that, I would maybe err on the side of like, perhaps it's time for you to reevaluate inefficiencies in your business and sort of just figure out, okay, once I'm allowed to reopen to full capacity, assuming that that's going to happen eventually one day, I'm crossing my fingers, you can't see me, but I would like, what am I going to do to put myself in the best position to be able to handle that, to grow and to continue to grow once things are sort of leveled out?
Absolutely. I like keep saying to John, to my boyfriend, I'm like, because the whole like 1918, 1920s, and then it was like the roaring 20s, right? Like I think like the amount of people that just want to get on a plane and travel right now and like doing all these things, even weddings, I feel so bad for my brides and people trying to get married and make plans because there's like you said, there's no rhyme or reason of what's going to happen in the future. We don't know. No one has that crystal ball to know what's going to happen, but taking the time to really figure out, I think too, what we want. Like I look at the business and doing e-commerce online now, my lifestyle is probably going to change in the next 5 years with maybe children, mostly children, marriage, all of that stuff. We're at that age, right? So trying to see what's going to happen within our businesses in that time frame. And back to the beginning of our conversation about planning too far ahead, I always thought, you guys, I think you and Lauren touched on it with hitting 25. I thought 25 was going to be like, I'm an adult. Like all of a sudden it was going to hit me. And I was like, I'm going to have like everything put together. I'm just going to be the person I'm meant to be. And then I look when I was younger, I was like, 25, like that's pretty old. Like when you're like really young looking at a 25-year-old, and I'm like, I'm still a kid. Like I don't like, now that I'm past 25, I'm like, yeah, no, that doesn't matter. And now I'm like, well, 30, will I have my shit together when I'm 30? Probably not either, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, and especially now with, again, like, I don't know, I'm obsessed with TikTok, I guess. I see all these like really successful creators and they're like 21. And I think to myself, like, what was I doing when I was 21? Because I didn't have the foresight to be like, I'm going to start this really successful internet business. Like, I mean, we were living in a different world back then. It was like 7 years ago, but still, yeah, things had just changed so quickly and you sort of have to be able to adapt, but also, yeah, understand that like, there's really no set timeline. And if you can take that pressure off yourself to be like, oh, well, by 30, I have to have X, Y, and Z, it again sort of just like makes things a little bit more fun because you don't have that pressure of being like, well, my business needs to be at like this amount of income by this time, because then I'm not successful if I don't reach that. And sort of just understanding that like everyone's on a different journey. So yeah, there's those kids, I want to call them, who are 21 and millionaires because they created this like internet sensation, but not comparing myself to them or to anyone else in the entrepreneurial space, because even like my journey is different than yours. And everyone has different goals really at the end of the day and different values, things that they want to get out of their business. So not putting that pressure on yourself to be like, I have to have all of these things, because I think what often happens, sorry, I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction.
No, go for it.
Is especially with the internet, I find this on Instagram. I actually muted a bunch of profiles recently because I was starting to get triggered by people who were entrepreneurs and they were having all this great success. And I was thinking to myself, like, well, why can't I have that? And why can't I have this? And then I took a minute and asked myself, like, I don't even have an interest in having any of those things. I don't want to have 5 houses and work from my laptop anywhere in the world. I like my stability of like living in a small town and traveling occasionally, but I have no interest in being like a digital nomad, for example. But I was finding myself getting so caught up in this idea of like, oh, that seems so cool, I really want that thing. And then I had to sort of take a step back and be like, okay, well, what do I want for me? Sorry, my puppy is having a little play date in the background, but coming to this idea of like, what's important to me? What do I want right now? And not getting so caught up in like sort of the vanity of what everyone else is doing, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you. Like even the whole having luxury cars, having that luxury bag. I remember when I was younger, I was like, when I hit 5 years in business, I'm going to go buy my first Louis Vuitton. That was like my thing. And then I'm like, I can buy a lot of product with this like $5,000 bag I want. Like, what is realistic and does that make sense? No. Am I going to get joy out of this physical product, or I'm going to get joy about building a new platform and sharing with other entrepreneurs, like doing something valuable than just something with a price tag on it that I think I'm going to become this different person when I have this handbag on my shoulder, right?
Yeah. And I always wonder that. I'm just like, I don't know. I guess I have like a different perspective than I think a lot of people, especially in like the online entrepreneurial space, where I'm really like not materialistic. I don't own a lot of stuff and I don't really have an interest, like you said, in like, okay, it would be nice to go and buy like a Mercedes, but like, okay, then I have this nice car, but now what? I could have used that like 70 grand to grow my business in another way. Like I just have this obsession with like putting that stuff into experiences or the platform or like the business itself versus just like accumulating nice stuff. And I'm not to say like, if you're listening to this and that's what you're into, that's fine. It's just not me.
Well, and I think too, I look at when I'm always like, if it still works, if it still works, use it. Like I have an iPhone 7 and like, yeah. And I drive like a car I've had since I graduated college. And I'm like, my friends will get in my car. I'll never forget. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I had a bunch of girlfriends. I remember buying my car and I was like so proud of it. And I remember this is just recently this summer, we were going to go see a friend and they're like, oh my God, you still have the same car? And I'm like, yeah, it's perfectly fine. Like it's got four wheels. It gets me to point A to point B. But I think because they had this perspective of me as a business owner, I had all this money or whatever, but I'm like, I have bills to pay. Like now we have a home that we have to pay for. I have two businesses. I have 8 girls to pay on payroll. Like I don't have like, yeah, I could go out and buy a new car, but is that really me as a person? No. And I think for everyone listening to this too, like, yeah, I probably do need a new phone. Like it's going to fail on me soon. But I think it's something that people need to realize that it's whatever you value. If you value putting that back into your business, or you value having a nice car and having like that as part of your visage of who you are, I think people need to just be okay with that. Because back to what we were saying, what people think, I really think part of the reason why I'm like this too is because I don't want my staff or someone to look at me and be like, oh wow, she's just buying all these fancy things and she's only paying us this much. Right.
Yeah.
I really realized, I think also during COVID, of being kind of alone and with my thoughts too. I think it's kind of scary at times, and really thinking of like, why don't I spend more money on myself? Why don't I've had the same clothes probably since high school. Thank goodness I'm the same size. But I'm like looking at all these different things, like having this phone that I've had forever, looking at the car I've had forever, and not really spending the time. But I look at the trips we've gone on, back to your point of travel. Like I really value travel now on a whole other level. I value putting money back into my business. I value giving my girls bonuses and seeing them succeed. So I think really depends on the person, and it's okay either way on however you strategize that.
Yeah, it ultimately just comes down to you really getting clear on what your values are and making sure that the decisions you're making are aligned with those things. So if you want to, like you said, have lots of nice things, then that's totally okay. If you would rather save it for experiences, that's fine too. If you want to invest it in your business, like wherever you're at and what seems good to you now is awesome. Focus on that. But again, you don't have to hold yourself to this standard of like, just because I said this is what works for me now, it works for me forever. Who knows? Again, in 5 years, maybe I want to go buy a Rolls Royce. I don't know. I'm not me in 5 years. Like things change and your circumstances change and your perspective changes. So always keeping that in mind when it comes to like developing what your values are. Everything's sort of temporary. So you don't have to just like pick something and then that's who you are forever.
Well, maybe we'll recap this in 5 years.
Yeah. Welcome back.
Yeah, exactly. And revamp. Okay, we said this, but actually this is what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like that with anything. I even think of like where my business was 3 years ago when I started and what I thought at that time it was going to look like and how it looks now, regardless of like the whole pandemic, even just like where I focus my time and energy. It's not like they're two totally different worlds. And that's still a relatively short period of time, like 3 years. I'm sure you've experienced the same from opening your spa versus where it is now. I imagine those two things look very drastically different.
Oh, I look at, because we just had our 5-year anniversary back in November, and my word this year is reflect, because I don't think I reflect enough on the things I've done in my life. And I feel like I'm always so hard on myself. And that's just something that my word last year was comfortable, because I was really suffering just with a bunch of like mental health when it came to anxiety and who I was kind of like honing in. I think it was the whole 25 thing. I don't really know, but it was like trying to be more comfortable in who I am. And I feel like with the pandemic, it actually gave me time to figure that out. It gave me that 3 months to step away from my business and figure out, okay, who am I as a person? I don't even know anymore, because I'm just this business owner that goes to work every day and just going with emotions, making sure everything's working. So my word this year was reflect, because I think I needed to reflect on all the things that I have done, but realizing like, who am I, and reflecting on that as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm not about the past. Like, I'm not trying to be like, I'm usually like, oh, always taking a step forward. But I think people do need to reflect on the things that they've done and really congratulate themselves and celebrate those successes.
100%. And that's what I was going to say, is this idea of like giving ourselves credit, because I think as entrepreneurs, it's sort of ingrained in us that we're always looking forward to the next project, the next goal, the next milestone. And we forget to take a second and think to ourselves, like, okay, but wow, like, look at everything that I've built. Look what I created by myself or with help from people. Like, that's fine too. But allowing yourself to understand the fact that like it took you to decide that like my name's Danielle and I'm going to start a business, like that's a huge first step. And then everything you've done since then deserves your recognition of yourself. And so an exercise I actually work through with my clients is getting them to either have like a physical spreadsheet on the wall or like an Excel sheet where they write down their wins. So every time something exciting happens, they will write it down in the spreadsheet so that at the end of the year, or at the end of the month, they can come back and look at like, because you always feel like the end of the month comes and you're like, I didn't do anything this month. But if you have this list of like, oh, wait, I signed this new client and I did this and I did this, and it's like, wow, I actually did all of these really amazing things. But because we're so focused on like what's coming next, we just brush everything off like it's not a big deal.
100%. I agree with everything you just said, because I even look at like what we were saying about the week, right? You look at the week and I looked back at my notebook from like last year and just looking through like every day the to-do list I did. And I'm like, wow, even in a week, you add all those things up and like what you've accomplished in a week that you probably wouldn't have like reflected on that if you didn't take the time to look back.
Yeah. And we always feel like we're not doing enough. And so if we can sort of afford ourselves that opportunity to be like, wait, I actually did like 20 things this week, like that's a lot.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I just think I think as women too, we're definitely multitaskers. Like we literally have so many hats, and I don't even think we realize that either. And even with work, I think people might come into the spa and realize like half the time I don't think people know I own the business, which is fine because I just like it that way too, that I'm an employee, I'm there working, doing my thing. But I look and I think people think, oh, I have Fridays off. I'm physically not there. But to be honest, I'd rather be in the spa and be working services than doing all this admin stuff that I don't want to be doing. But I look at how we have a product line, we have mentor programs, we have all these things going on, online teaching. And I don't think people realize looking from the outside how many things are going on or having assistance, because everyone needs help one way or another, right? Like I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for my team or my support system that I have, and even other entrepreneurs. Like it's been incredible talking with everybody, especially during the pandemic, because I think I'm realizing, and I'm sure all the listeners and also the people that I've been interviewing are realizing, no matter the business we're in, the main like behind the scenes tactics and the kind of like the systems are all very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and always trying to learn from each other. That's why I'm always like a huge advocate for people. Like, if you have a question, find someone who you know is going to have the answer. There's always this like fear and shame associated with admitting that we don't know something, but you're better off in terms of efficiency, even to go and just ask that person, like, hey, Nicole, how do you do this in your business? Like, can you help me? Because more often than not, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, most entrepreneurs are going to be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Like I'll show you exactly what I'm doing. And the people who don't want to help you are the people you don't want to be associated with anyway. So bye.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even the whole podcast thing, like obviously me with Zoom has been a struggle too, because I'm like a hands-on person. So like learning all this tech stuff has been like an experiment in itself, and just learning, and thank God for YouTube and Google, and just like all my assistants too. Like I'm like messaging, okay, I can't open this. What's going on? This file isn't going through. And I feel like I have such a great network of people, even for the podcast, like yourself. And I have another friend that have their own podcast. And I've been like, okay, what mic is the best one that you've used? What have you noticed for Zoom? Is that the best way to do it? And I think that's even a subject I want people to hear, that we're all in this together. I know that's like been the pandemic quote of the year, but I think no matter where you are, like you said, be okay with asking questions. And like, what's the worst thing someone's gonna say no?
Exactly. And understanding that like literally none of us know everything. And half the time I don't know what I'm doing. So you might see me on my Instagram stories looking all clean and polished and talking about my new program that I'm launching. But behind the scenes, I'm like, how do I even do this thing? I got to figure out a payment program. How do I set it up so they can pay online? And I'm sitting here just guessing my way, Googling my way to a business One of my friends taught me that when I first became an entrepreneur. Like she was like, honestly, I built my entire business through Google. And I was like, what are you talking about? And now I get it, because anytime I don't know anything, what do? I Google the answer.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, and that's something even with John and I say, because he's obviously super busy. And I'm like, okay, how do you do, like, I was trying to do a DocuSign thing the other day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't figure this out. My computer like hates this document. It's not working. He's like, okay, why don't you just Google it? He's like, you're getting so frustrated trying to figure it out. Just Google how to do it. And then it was like 2 seconds and I had to figure it out.
Yeah, honestly, there's no shame in that. Like people might look like they have it together, but at the end of the day, we're all just Googling our way to success. So it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, totally. And that's where I just think I look back at like when I was 20, when I started my first business, and it was like, thank God I had a good bookkeeper, an accountant, and all the numbers, because that was something I knew I was not good at. So I needed to hire and outsource. And that's okay. Like people might look at you and I and say, like you were saying about your payment systems and stuff, like we might look like we have it all figured out when really we're like a hot mess behind the scenes, just trying to figure it out.
Exactly. This is literally me yesterday trying to figure out how people can choose both colors and sizes of merchandise. I was like, I don't know. And then I'm like testing it like 20 times till it finally worked. So like, okay, here we go. But it's all trial and error. And just like, yeah, you don't see the messy part, but trust me when I say that it's there.
Well, and the behind the scenes, like Danny, my assistant, we were saying how with videos, like we did like 28 TikToks in a day. We like batch contented a bunch. And so many people were like, we want to see behind the scenes of how you do it, or how you do your marketing, or how you're doing your month of content. And I'm like, this is the stuff people want to see, is the behind the scenes. They want to see the hot mess, because it's a realization. It's not that polished Instagram profile.
Exactly. Like all the stuff that goes into it.
Yeah.
Y'all don't want to know.
Yeah. That's gonna be a long video.
Yeah. Let's start. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, this was awesome. I think we hit on so many good points, and so many like real points too, and I think normalizing a lot of different topics.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's best to just understand that your journey, whether it's in entrepreneurship or not, is yours. What everyone else has to say doesn't matter. And the people who have strong negative opinions are usually just projecting their own insecurities. So kind of keeping that in mind, but also understanding that like you can do whatever you want whenever you want. And if you decide you want to change your mind, do it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I feel like and another thing I want to do more of this year is learning to say no. If it doesn't align with me, or it just doesn't make sense, it's okay to say no.
Yes, that's hard though, because you always like, I'm a people pleaser by nature. So I'm always like, yeah, sure, I can adjust my whole schedule to fit you in at this time. And then I'm like, why did I do this thing? So understanding that like you have to look after yourself first, especially in business. If you want to be able to show up and serve your clients or your audience in a way that's meaningful, you have to really protect your energy. And so creating those boundaries is huge for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the energy, I feel, I don't know about you, but the energy of working on technology is like, I feel so much more drained at the end of the day. Like I get energy from other people, and I think I'm really cautious, especially working in the service industry, of realizing who gives me good energy and who doesn't, and trying the ones that don't, giving me that kind of barrier that I'm like, okay, I'm not allowing that in. But through the computer, I don't know if it's given me some different energies or what, but I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm just exhausted.
Yeah, I've been doing that too, like intentionally taking time away from my computer. And like we were sort of briefly touched on earlier, like making sure that I'm getting outside at least once a day, because it can be so easy to just like wake up, sit at my computer all day, eat dinner, and then like go watch TV and go to bed. And I'm like not seeing the real world. Like I need to open a window, get some oxygen. Like somebody help me.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I had so much fun, and I think our listeners are just going to be jogging their brains a little bit more of different ideas, and realizing that we might look like we have it all together, when I think a lot of entrepreneurs are just making it work, which is completely normal.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah.